Hey guys, welcome to Algos Explained. My name is David Kim, and today we have a question from one of our viewers. Forgive me for not being able to pronounce your name, you know who you are. Uh, but the question was a pattern printing question, and he gave me two different types of patterns, P1, P2, and we're going to go over both of them. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about strategy first, and once we talk about the strategy for P1, we'll go over the algorithm, and then we'll go over P2, and that strategy, and then the algorithm. And so to get started right away, in terms of pattern printing, usually they'll give you a diagram that looks like this, but in reality, when you print it out, it's gonna all be a right triangle pretty much. But beyond that, what we're looking for P1 is usually this is pattern printing, like you said in your email. So let's go ahead and look for all the patterns that we can find and use those connections or patterns to help us discover what kind of algorithm we can write about it. And so P1 here, it looks pretty simple. N is 4. This is an example. He also gave me another example, but N equals 4. This is pretty much the output. And what we can tell is here, we have 4 lines, and it looks like we're just going, increasing the order of the numbers, or increasing the numbers as we go on. And so this one would be N equals 5. And N being the input that the function gets. And what we can see from that is that we know that this is N5 because the first pattern that we can see is how many lines that this diagram is going to have. And 2, 3, 4, 5. And so we know that there's 5 lines here, and that's why it was the N5. What else can we see here? We can see that 1 is 1, and well, we also already recognize that it's just increasing as we go this way. 1, the next line just continues from 1, 2, 3. The next line just continues from a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on and so forth. If we had a 6 here, we would start from 16 and have some more numbers. Another thing that we can recognize here is that this has 1 elements, so we can kind of write the length of this first line was 1, and this one was 2, this one is 3, 4, and 5. And so what I mean by that is there are 2 elements here. If we box these guys up, there's only 1 number, there's 2 numbers, there's 3 numbers here, 4 numbers, and then 5 numbers. And so if we were to create our 6, and I think for pattern printing this is very important that you are able to create that next line yourself. Let's look at what it might be. It'd be 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. How much is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We need 6 numbers, so this one would go all the way up to 21. And so that would be if n was now 6, this is the output that we wanted to give out. And so from here, what we can do is we've gathered that pretty much the most important thing is that the way we get our next number is by just increasing that last number from that previous line. So we know how to get our next number. How do we get our next line? That has to do with a combination of the second line has 2 elements, the third line has 3 elements, and that, I guess that kind of goes into how do we form our next line. And so yeah, so far that is what we have. Not going to reiterate it. Rewind the video if you want to, but let's jump right into our algorithm, and let's walk through that and see how it works for our case here. All right, welcome back. So now we have our algorithm written out for P1, the first pattern, and let's walk over kind of what we want to do. How about let's create the pattern again once more here, and we'll go from there. So the first one we know is just the first one, and then we have a 2 and a 3. That's our second line that we printed. We have 2 elements, then 3, or not 3, because we have to continue on from that 3. It'd be a 4, 5, 6 with 3 elements, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, I believe. That was the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So this is a N5 here. And let's go ahead and see how our algorithm works to print this one out. And when we print it out, it's all, like I said, it's going to be a right triangle. But I think that's kind of expected. If you want to make it perfect, usually that's not required of these pattern printing problems, but you might be able to play around with the spaces, and you might even have to go backwards. Um, so nums, let's assume that our nums was 5, or num was 5. And so what we did here was we created num1, and what we did was we had a loop inside a loop. If you can see here, the skeleton of this function is going to be, we have a for loop and another for loop, and we're console logging within this for loop. We're not returning anything because this is a printing problem. So we're going to have 2 for loops, and what's happening is we're console logging string num, which is each of these lines, or num string. So we're printing num strings, so we need to see, okay, how do we create num strings? If we look where it's initialized, it's initialized within this for loop. So in this scope, we have num string, and it's just an empty string for starters. And the reason why we have it within this scope, we have it in the scope because we don't need it to be outside, but also we want to reinitialize it as an empty string, because each time we print it out, it's going to be something different. We don't want to have 1 hanging around here or 2, 3 hanging around on the third line. We want it to be fresh. And so that's why we have it initialized to empty string. And how do we add to that? Well, we add to that with this inner for loop. As we see here, num string is a space plus equals current num. You don't need the space, but that kind of makes it look a little neater, especially when you start getting into double digits. It's going to look very messy if you don't have the space, because it's not easy to distinguish numbers when they're single digits. And so what we have here is a space plus the current num, and we're constantly incrementing the current num. And so where do we start with that? We start with here, current num is just 1. So I think the best way to explain it, you might think that I just went from an example to the solution. Kind of confusing. I think it's a little confusing too, but let's go ahead and walk through the function, and it'll make a lot more sense. And so let's pretend, let's go ahead and right over here. Well, actually, I need to try to get out of the way. Let's erase this one and assume that n was 1. So if n equals 1, we all know what we want. We just want a 1 here. And so let's look at how our function allows us to do that. When num was 1, current num is going to be 1. So Cn is 1. So we go through this first for loop. We initialize I at 1, and so we make our conditional here less than or equal to nums, because we wanted to do it that many times. I++, standard iterator. Num string is an empty string right now. And we have this inner for loop. So far, we don't have anything. This is our console. We don't have anything in here right now. We have this inner for loop that has a j, because we can't use I anymore. J is equal to 1, and as long as j is less than or equal to I, j increments. Or as long as j is less than or equal to 1, sorry, not that, I believe that should be I. There we go. J is less than or equal to I. We'll run through this. J will increment. We create string num, space, and then current num. So now string num is a space plus our current num, which was 1. So it's kind of a space and a 1 there. And current num increments. So now that's 2. And we go back up here. J is now 2. And 2 is less than or equal to I. It's not it. We need to get to the next line if we want a next line. And so for now, we exit out of this for loop, print out the string num, and so that's a 1 there. And then we increment I is now 2, but 2 less than or equal to nums, which was 1. And it doesn't go, so we just end the function here. So for n1, we do have that. Let's go ahead and do something like n3. N equals 3. And n stands for nums over there. Let's get rid of that box. And so what we want to make sure we have is current num and string num string. All right, n is equal to 3. So we know that this big for loop, we're going to do it 3 times. And what that means is we're going to print something 3 times. Because within this for loop, we print something, right? So we already know that within our console, we're going to have 3 lines printed, line 1, line 2, and line 3, because nums was 3, and within this big for loop, we console logged out something. So we know we're going to print out something, you know, hopefully the right stuff. And so let's go ahead here. Num string is initialized to an empty string there. And I'm just going to do that for now. Now the inner for loop is again where we create the num string so that we can print it out at the end of the bigger for loop. After we end the small for loop, at the end of the big for loop, we want to print out num string. We want to print out this created, and that's going to be printed out 3 times again. And so let's create that num string. Num string is space plus current num, that's a 1. And current num, that gets incremented, so that's a 2 now. And we go out here, j is now 2, j is not, and also let's keep track of, here, I'm going to do a better job at this, give ourselves a little bit more room. Let's see, what we need to do is nums was 3, current num was 1, string num string is that I. Let's keep track of I, and let's keep track of j. That'll help us kind of go through the loops a little easier. So going over it again, num string, we decided, okay, it's 1, and now I was 1 and j was 1. But now current num, we incremented that. At the end of j, we ended the little loop. So j is 2 now. And we go through this conditional 2 less than I, not going to work out. So we end the small loop. We print out the num string, which is a 1 here. And we go back up here. And now I is 2. And num string equals just the empty again. We go into the little one, j is now equal to 1 again, and now we know this will run twice because we already know ahead of time, j is 1 right now, j will run for it being 1, and j will also run for it being 2 because it needs to equal to the I. And so we know that it's going to run twice. Let's see what it does with our current num. Our current num is 2, our string num is going to be 2. There's a space plus the current num increments to 3. And now j goes over to 2, but 2 less than or equal to 2, that's fine, so we're going to go over it again. Num string equals that. Okay, I think there's an error in that formula. Num string plus equals. That way we could add to that. If it just was a equal there. Oh yeah, that looks bad. If it was just an equal there, then it would have replaced that. We would have lost our 2. But since it's a plus 2, we have a space, and we add in the current num, which is the 3. If you caught that ahead of time, great. Current num now goes to 4, and j increments to 3. 3 is now less than or equal to 2, so we come out of that and console log whatever we have as our num string. Num string is a 2 and a 3, so print out 2, 3 like that. And once we go back up here, num string is going to be empty again. Let's take out, and j eventually goes back to, well, it was a 3 the last we saw it. I is going to increment as a 3 now, and since 3 less than or equal to nums, which is a 3, we'll go again for the for loop, print out our last thing. And so num string now equals to plus current num, and current num is 4. And so, or well, before we did the num string, sorry, j goes back to being a 1. And so now num string is 4, and current num increments, that's a 5. And we're done with the little loop, so we increment that to a 2. 2 less than or equal to 3, that works. The num string goes again. 5, current num increments, that's a 6. And that increments, that's a 3. 3 is okay with the being a 3. So remember, I is 3 and j is 3. We go again, and we add in the 6 here from the current num. And now j increments to 4. Now 4 not less than or equal to 3. So we console log the string num, whatever we had here, which is the 4, 5, 6, 6. And since we finished the bigger loop, that increments to 4. 4 less than or equal to the 3 of nums, not any longer, so doesn't qualify anymore. So we break out of that bigger for loop. We don't return anything, so we end the function. And we look at kind of what we have console logged here. At this point, n was 3, and so we want kind of this much here. And if we can see that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that does equal what we have there. And so that concludes P1 parameter printing. The reason why we have a space there is just to make it look cleaner. If you don't want that space here, pretty much you can just console log a slice of 1, and that'll do the trick for you. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and look at P2.